Creak! Thump! Creak! Thump! Yuli wasn't eaten in his first hour in the forest, nor in his second. He sat only a few tails into the trees, foreleg folded under his chest, trying to remain inconspicuous. He watched as the rocky shadow of the great boulder slid from one side of the canopy to the other, certain that at any moment his mom was going to poke her nose into the forest, having chased Mr. Scratch away. She loved Yuli too much to leave him all alone. She would come for him any moment now. With night came a steady wind that lashed the trees and shifted the moonlight. The shadows began to play tricks on Yuli's eyes. The leaves overhead became the ruffled wings of bats. The bush to his right was the bristled back of a bear, and to his left was a tree of moaning faces. Yuli covered his eyes with his good forepaw. It didn't help. He could still hear the rustling trees, still see the terrifying images on the backs of his eyelids. He decided it was probably a good idea not to wait for his mom any longer, and instead to exit the forest as quickly as foxily possible. He hopped toward the mouth of the wood, where he entered. But then a hooting turned him left. A bone snap spun him right, and a sound like slopping entrails swung him around again. Suddenly, Yuli didn't know which way was straight ahead. The branches of the forest pointed every direction, making him feel cross-eyed. Everything was shadows and more shadows. "Mom?" he whispered. He swiveled his ears, listening for the familiar sounds of the boulder fields, but all he heard was the creaking of trees. He sniffed for familiar scents, but the air was barky and strangled. He wanted to howl for his mom to come and save him, but the forest was filled with ears and bellies searching for a snack. Yuli sniffed out a nook in the roots of a tree where nothing could sneak up behind him, and he wrapped his tail around himself. Ever since he could remember, Yuli's sisters had told him he wouldn't survive kidhood. He couldn't jump, couldn't hunt. He couldn't even clean himself without falling over. He could almost hear them now, whispering in the dark forest. "Don't worry, Yuli. Once you're dead, you can still make friends. The centipedes will twine through your nostrils and out your ears. The spiders will make a webby home across your rib cage and your eye sockets. And then the shrouded fox will come for you and steal you away to the underwood. And that's where you'll live forever." A groan startled Yuli awake. He tumbled out of the hairy roots with a yelp, certain he was about to be plucked up by a branchy claw and devoured by the tree with many faces. When nothing grabbed him, he blinked open his eyes. Patches of golden sunlight writhed on the forest floor. Morning had come. He hadn't been so sure it would. The groan sounded again, and Yuli realized it was coming from his own stomach. He hadn't eaten a thing since that baby squirrel. Mud clung to his fur and his skin clung to his ribs. He remembered his mother's warming words. Maybe he was so skinny that no hunter would want to eat him. He sniffed the morning air for her scent. Nothing. His stomach grumbled again. He had to eat something. Soon. He marked the roots of the tree so his mom could find him. Then he took a deep breath. "Come on, pause." And for the first time, Yuli set off to hunt for himself. "The forest is a feast," Yuli said aloud in a reassuring sort of way. "And foxes are clever, above all, above all." Unfortunately, neither statement brought any squirrel babies tumbling from the treetops. He searched his memory for the hunting lessons his mother had taught his sisters. Listen for the rustlings and gnawings in the brush. Stalk quietly until your prey flees into the open. Match your movement with its movements. Low muzzle for a bird or a squirrel, high muzzle for a mouse. Bound from afar. That last part didn't really work for a fox with 3 legs. Yuli wouldn't be able to bound over a fire ant if a whole heap of mouse dust was waiting for him on the other side. He swiveled his ears, listening with one and then the other. The forest was filled with scrabbles and nibbles and tiny digging paws. The delicious sounds skittered through his muzzle, curling his lips. How could he catch them? Prey lived high in the trees or buried deep in the ground, guarded by burrs and thorns and bugs that would bite his eyelids. He tried sniffing out a stream of scent along the forest floor, just like his mom had taught him. He sniffed and sniffed until his nose grew so dry he was afraid it might crumble off. It was no use. All he smelled was dirt and leaf mulch. He plopped down again, ready to give up and make everlasting friends with the centipede. Tasty hiding. Yuli perked his ears. Tasty hiding. A bird sang in the treetops. Yuli had spent so much time alone in the den entrance while his sisters fought one another that he had come to understand many bird songs. He'd listen to the birds sing and then watch as they swoop up some delicious morsel. Tasty hiding, tasty hiding. He sniffed in the direction where the bird's bill was pointed. A coppery scent laced the wind, leading him to a split in a tree trunk. His stomach gurgled. He licked his whiskers. There were warm things in there, and they were moving. Yuli crouched behind a shrub. Unless his nose was lying, the critters inside that trunk were small and helpless and wouldn't be able to put up a fight. He bent low on his foreleg and wiggled his hips in a way he had seen his sisters do 100 times before. He made a mighty bound toward the tree, his forepaw thumping along the ground. He hadn't smelled the mother possum. She scurried down the trunk and into the split, reappearing a moment later with 3 baby possums dangling from her mouth. She flashed Yuli a murderous look and then scampered away. Yuli was so upset that he fell over. His stomach whined as several other edible creatures fled the area, running from the kit whose paw steps were as loud as crashing boulders. Evening fell again. Branches chewed the sky. Yuli lay, head in the dirt, blinking dully. His stomach had stopped growling, as if even it had given up on him. Ever since he was a tiny kid, Yuli had known he would spend his life alone. He'd never meet a vixen. He'd never start a den. He'd starve somewhere all by himself. He just never thought that day would come this soon. He closed his eyes and waited for the spiders and centipedes to make a home out of him. A scent caught him by the nostrils. It was so strong and succulent that it rolled him up onto his stomach. This was not the smell of just born bodies, furless and helpless and ready for eating. It was warmer. Yuli got to his paws and followed the scent. He had smelled fire once before when the firs had smoldered in the distance, casting a smoky shadow over the boulder fields. He had smelled entrails steaming in the open air when his sisters ripped open a groundhog. But this intoxicating scent lay somewhere in between, singeing his nostrils as much as it enticed them. The smell twined between the leaves, tickling Yuli's nose and pulling him along. It got his stomach rumbling again, and drips of drool patterned the dirt. Soon the scent was all around him, so thick it was almost filling. The air became hazy, and he saw coils of smoke twine through a clearing. Yuli froze. No birds sang. No mice bounded through the elder trees, as if the creatures knew to keep quiet in this place. But then, creak, thump, creak, thump. He crouched low. His sisters had never told him stories like this before. What smelled this enticing but sounded so strange? Creak, thump! Creak, thump! He glanced back into the tangled forest and the starvation that awaited him there. Then, as quietly as possible, he hopped toward the clearing, moving from tree to tree. He peeked around a trunk and was so confused by what he saw that he had to blink a few times. The thing in the clearing was as big as a boulder and half as tall as the trees. Its sides were perfectly flat, save the top, which was sloped with dead grass. Something like a rocky trunk stuck out of the grass, spewing the delicious-smelling smoke. In the boulder side was a hole flickering bright like a firefly. It cast a yellow haze through the dying dusk light. Yuli quirked his head. This boulder was hollow, and something was living in it. Creak, thump! Creak, thump! The sound was coming from the far side of the hollow boulder. Yuli licked his lips. His pounding heart and rumbling stomach played tug-of-war inside him. His stomach whined. Okay, Yuli whispered. I get it. Shh. Keeping low, he hopped into the clearing, whiskers alert. He sniffed along the boulder's flat side, rounding the first corner. Flies buzzed around a pile of something dark and wet. Yuli hopped closer and found entrails. Rotting entrails just sitting in the grass. Above them, the skin of a rabbit dangled from a stick, as if it had snagged its ears on a branch and spilled its guts out. Creak, thump! The sound wasn't coming from the rabbit. Yuli left the entrails and slowly peeked around the next corner. Creak, thump! His heart went cold. It was the skin of a little girl fox, dangling just like the rabbit's. She hung from her muzzle by what looked like a vine. Her body swung back and forth, her hind legs striking the side of the hollow boulder. Creak, thump! Creak, thump! Yuli backed away. The boulder must be a trap for foxes. Any moment, a vine was going to swoop down, snag him by the muzzle, and... He nearly jumped out of his skin when the fox opened her mouth and dropped to the ground. He froze as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The fox was more than just skin. And she hadn't been hanging by the vine at all. She'd been tugging at it. It was still wrapped around her neck. The girl fox stared at Yuli wide-eyed. He stared back, holding perfectly still, hoping she hadn't seen him in the low, flickering light. Are you, she said, stuffed? Yuli ran from the clearing, forepaw slipping, chest thumping, scrambling along the grass until he leapt into a bush where he froze and held his breath. Hello? The girl fox called. Hello? Yuli crouched in the bush. Not all foxes were nice, he knew. Not even if they were related to you. And foxes who weren't related to you could be even worse. Territorial. That was the word. If he went out there, that fox might seize him by the throat and shake him to death. Are you still there? The girl fox said. Yuli's stomach whined. Then again, if he grew any hungrier, he might vanish with a small pop. Maybe this fox would share some of those entrails. He'd even take the chewy bits. Yes, he called out. I'm here. Hearing the sound of his own pathetic voice made him wince, so he said, growlier, And me! There's two of us! This was the brave voice that made his mom laugh. He hoped it sounded menacing now. And you can't hurt us, he said. Then growling, "Because we'll chomp you to pieces." The fox in the clearing was quiet a moment. "I don't want to fight you." "You're right," he responded. "You don't. Because my claws are as sharp as slivers." Then, "And my teeth are as long as icicles. They'll freeze you and they'll shatter you into a million pieces." The voice in the clearing fell silent. "I guess I shouldn't mess with you then." Yuli's jaw fell open. The scary voice had worked. No one had ever believed he could hurt them before. His sisters used to tease that he was so harmless mice camped in his mouth at night. This fox hadn't so much as snickered at him. Will you help me?" she said. "I got caught by a human and I lost my mom, and now the human's going to boil me up and stick me in a cage and I'm stuck." Yuli's ears pricked. He didn't know what human was or what boiling was. In fact, he hadn't understood most of the sentence, only that this fox had lost her mom. He was about to tell her he'd lost his mom too when he caught himself. You didn't get tricked by your sisters 1,001 times without learning a thing or two. He remembered how the fox had swung by her muzzle from that vine and his ears folded back. How do we know that you aren't a dead fox who's going to gobble us up?" Then growlier, "Yeah, how do we know that?" The fox huffed, frustrated. "'Cause dead foxes can't talk, duh." She had a point. Then again, this fox had been dangling 1 minute and the next she was on her paws. "How do we know you're not lying?" "I can't prove to you that I'm not dead other than by talking to you," the fox said. "Besides, you're the one who's lying." What do you mean?" Yuli asked. Yeah, what do you mean?" The fox snorted. "Hiccups aren't contagious." A stone turned over in Yuli's stomach when he realized how he'd given away that he was just one fox instead of two. I gotta go," he said, hobbling away. We've got to go." "Yeah, good luck with everything." "No, wait," the fox called out. "Please don't leave. I'm sorry I called you a liar. I'm sorry I said duh. I'm going to die here. Miss Potter's going to kill me. The water is boiling and she'll be back any second and please." Yuli stopped. "What stuck you?" "A rope," the fox said. "Rope?" Yuli peeked into the clearing. From high on the boulder grew the brown vine that wrapped around the fox's neck. So she'd been trying to free herself. The fox's eyes pierced through the dust. She looked softer than Yuli's sisters, chubbier. Her fur smelled of unripe apples. "If I help you," Yuli said, "can I eat those innards?" "Yes," the fox said. "They're all yours. Just hurry." Yuli hopped a few tails into the clearing. By the flickering light of the hollow boulder, he got a good look at the fox. Her fur was as light as pollen, with gray stars sprinkled through the coat. She was a little pudgy, something Yuli didn't even know was possible for a fox, and the tip of her tail was hairless. "Can you—" The fox craned her head, trying to nibble at the vine around her neck. "Help me get this thing off?" Yuli's first thought was no, he couldn't. No one had ever asked him for help before because, well, he wasn't good at things. Now and then, his sisters had used his back as a boost to get on top of a rock that they never invited him on. But beyond that, he wasn't any help at all. The fox stared at him with her blue swirl eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you." Yuli still didn't move. He wasn't so worried about that anymore, just of making a fool of himself. "You have your friend to keep you safe, right?" the girl fox said. She roughened her voice. "The one who sounds like this?" "Oh, right, yeah," he said, searching out a believable place his fake friend could hide. He climbed a tree. He can drop from above like rain made of teeth. Fang rain, the fox nodded. Got it. Yuli hopped forward, head low. What do I do? The fox took the vine in her mouth and gave it a tug. It squeezes my neck whenever I pull on it. I need you to hold it so I can slip out. Yuli did what he was told. He took the hairy vine in his teeth and pulled. The fox wiggled and jerked her neck. Pull, she said. I'm trying, he said, mouth full. Come on, pull, pull. I'm trying. And then the vine fell loose in his mouth and the fox was free. Run, she cried. Forget the entrails. She darted into the wood, leaving Yuli with the rope. He dropped it with a thunk. He said. A section of the hollow boulder smacked open and something screamed in a high-pitched shrill. Gub's nipping! She's Frook the Froopling! The creature had wild gray hair that stuck out at all angles and a loose skin that swept all the way around two knobby knees. Yuli's heart nearly stopped when he saw that the thing walked on its hind legs. Its forelegs hung high on its body, and instead of claws, it had long, fleshy appendages that wriggled like fat worms. Fie! The wild thing screeched. Puffer! Yuli bolted after the girl fox, and even on only 3 legs, he was too quick for the creature with 2. Yuli came to a stop in a grove of birch trees. Panting, he looked back to make sure the horror on 2 legs wasn't still following him. The forest was still. Fox? He called quietly. Chubby Fox? No response. He sniffed the air. Now that the haze of smoke was gone, he was able to pick up the fox's unripe apple scent. He followed it to a puddle and found her staring at her own reflection. She didn't look up when he approached. He hopped closer, sniffing warily. What are you doing? The fox's head snapped up and she came at him with a flash. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for her teeth to sink into his throat. When he felt nothing, he cracked an eyelid and found her face pressed close to his. What color are my eyes? She said. They're, he gulped, gold. Blue and gold. The fox nodded. She returned to the puddle and again stared at her rippling reflection. She seemed surprised by the fox staring back at her. Yuli said. What's your name? She kept staring at the puddle. Mine's Yuli. The only response was a loon in the distance. Finally, the girl fox took a breath. I was in there so long, I thought I'd missed it. Missed what? My kidhood. The fox stared at her reflection and blew out her cheeks. I got kind of chubby, huh? I don't know. I didn't know you before. She sighed. I guess it doesn't matter. She quirked an eyebrow. I'm free. She took off, darting this way, then that, weaving through the trees. It feels so good to be out. My legs are all long and springy. She zoomed circles around Yuli, growling and making little nips at his ears and tail. He cowered. What are you doing? Making up for lost time. Yuli ducked as she bounded over his back and then bounded over it again. Are you being mean? He said, ears flattened. No, playful. He tried to stand upright just as the fox's paw landed on his back. She performed a fancy kickflip, sending his body thumping to the ground. Ow! He cried. Oops, she said, giggling. Sorry. And she took off running again. Yuli did not like this fox's playfulness, not one bit. He would have thought twice about helping her escape from that vine if he'd known she was going to act like this. He stopped. He started to hop into the forest. Hey! The girl fox called after him. Where are you going? Nowhere, Yuli said, sitting back down. Please don't jump on me again. I'm Mia, she said, tail wagging. Yuli nodded slowly. I'm still Yuli. He wondered what Mia saw when she looked at him. He was small for his moons, he knew, and it was hard not to notice his withered front paw. His legs were as skinny as sticks and his fur was ragged from too much scratching. His mom had told him that he had a violet tinge to his fur, like he'd been smooshed all over by a blackberry bush. But his sisters teased him that his eyes were always wet and shiny, like he was about to cry any moment. Yuli widened his eyes, drying them out so Mia wouldn't think he was scared. Nice to meet you, Yuli, she said, not seeming to notice his paw or his fur or his eyes or anything. She got low on her forelegs and wriggled her hips. What should we do? Yuli's stomach pinched and let out a gurgle. He said, wavering. Are you hungry at all? Nope, Mia said. She did a spin. But let's hunt something. His stomach whined again. Yeah, okay. Oh, Mia said, seeing his withered paw for the first time. What happened? What, this? Yuli sniffed at it like it was no big deal. It's always been like this. Huh. She stared at his paw with a sadness in her eyes, as if it reminded her of something. But then she shook the thought away. Well, see ya! Mia gave her hips another wriggle and then darted off between the trees. Yuli sat and waited. He'd grown very good at it. He listened to the insects and the birds and the wind in the leaves, trying to ignore his grumbling stomach. He'd thought maybe Mia had abandoned him forever when he heard a splash and a miserable croak, and then she came trotting back, fur dripping, a dead creature in her jaws. Yuli had never seen anything like it before. It wasn't quite a frog, and it wasn't quite a lizard, and it had gills like a fish. Mia lay the creature on the ground. I've never hunted something by myself before. She pinned the creature's tail between her paws and ripped it in half, plopping the hind part in front of him. What is it? He said, trying not to wrinkle his muzzle. I don't know. It has gills, but it walks around. She snorted. The forest is squipping crazy. Yuli's eyes went wide. A word like that would get his sister's lips bitten, but Mia hadn't even batted an eyelash. His stomach gurgled again. He bit into the creature and a gush of slime squirted down his throat. At first he fought not to gag, but then his teeth ripped through the flesh and hunger roared up in him. After that he couldn't devour the legs quick enough. This tastes amazing, Mia said, gulping down an eyeball. I've been eating hot mud for weeks. Hot mud, Yuli said. Uh-huh. The two feasted in slobbery silence. Yuli could feel his stomach stretching, his skin pushing away from his ribs. He had to stop himself from whimpering. It felt so good to eat. You know, Mia said, licking slime from her beard, just because you're not a mouser doesn't mean you can't still catch stuff. You could use the nap and capture technique. Yuli stopped eating. You can catch things by taking naps? Yep. You just pretend you're dead, like this. Mia flopped over on her side, letting her tongue hang out. And when something delicious comes sniffing, she leapt up, chomping her teeth and making Yuli wince. You kill it. Miss Vix told me about that trick. Yuli nodded. He might be able to actually try it, so long as he didn't start hiccuping. Why are you being so nice to me? He asked. What do you mean? I don't know, he said. When the gill creature was nothing but bones, Mia got up, shook the slime from her beard, and then came at him, teeth bared. Well, what are you doing? He said, pressing his muzzle protectively into his throat. I was going to clean you, Mia said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. We just ate. Oh, Yuli said. No one had ever wanted to clean him before. His mom did it only because his sisters refused, and she hadn't cleaned him since Ava died. He swallowed. Okay. Mia gave his muzzle a lick. His forepaw trembled. A snarl rose in his throat. But as she started to clean his ears, he leaned into it. Her tongue was warm and scratchy and sent shivers to the end of his tail. He widened his eyes again, trying to stop the tears. Once Mia had finished cleaning, she said, "Does your friend need cleaning too?" Yuli shook himself out of his reverie. "Who?" "Your..." Mia nodded toward the canopy. "Friend?" "Oh, not right now. I cleaned him earlier." She gave him a knowing smirk. Then she closed her eyes and jutted her muzzle forward. Yuli hesitated. "You want me to?" Her ears twitched. "If you don't mind." Any time he tried to clean his sisters, they had bounded away screaming, "Yuck! Yuli breath!" He gave Mia's ear a small lick, then another and another. Her fur tasted of smoke at first, then something bland. But once he'd cleaned that away, she tasted as sweet and sour as unripe apples. Mia whimpered just as he had, as if she too hadn't been cleaned in a long time. When he finished, Mia shook her ears dry. "Welp," she said in a goodbye sort of way. "Yeah," Yuli said, heart skipping a beat. "Welp." "I should get going," she said. "My mom's waiting for me on the other side of those trees, and I don't want her worrying about me." "Oh, yeah, me too," he said. "I have to go and find my friend, the one hiding in the trees, so we can go to where we're going, which is pretty close to here." "Okay, then," she said. "Okay." His heart sank. Mia had nipped at him and jumped over him and knocked him over, but she had fed and cleaned him too. Yuli knew that the moment she walked away, it would feel like his guts were yanked out, leaving him as empty as that dangling rabbit skin. He pointed his newly cleaned whiskers towards where he thought his mom might be, and he knew that he was wrong. "Have fun with your friend," Mia said. I will," Yuli said. "Have fun with your mom." She walked off slowly. "See ya." "See ya," he called after her. "Bye." "Yeah, bye." And Mia set off in one direction, while Yuli set off in the same direction, and they did not part ways again for a time. "That one wasn't scary at all," the third kid said. "Like, really, truly." "Yeah," said the alpha. "That was almost heartwarming." "I liked it," the beta said. "You would," the third one said. The sky above the antler wood was greeny white now. The little one was relieved to hear a nice part of the story for once. She could sense that they were far from the end. The sounds of the antler wood still made her skin jumpy. Each tumbling leaf swiveled her ears. Each shadow looked like a dangling fox skin. "Mia and Yuli's meeting was a welcome respite from what they'd been through," the storyteller said. "But it's a dangerous thing to start caring for someone else. Now they each had 2 foxes to look after instead of 1, and they were about to stumble upon a place that was neither field nor forest, neither meadow nor wood. They were going to see something few foxes had seen before, and those that hadn't seen it had not escaped with their lives." If the little one had felt a touch of safety, that strangled it.